Today, we're going to talk about the end of the world. I'm just kidding. Inflation, hyperinflation, and how to prepare for an economic collapse. Inflation and hyperinflation. How to prepare for an economic collapse. First, let me say this. I'm no economist. I'm just an average guy with some common sense sitting around speculating and reading the writing on the wall. The writing on the wall says inflation is coming. Gas prices say it's already starting. Hyperinflation might be coming, so you need to be ready. What about a total economic collapse? Well, I don't think we need to worry yet about an economic collapse, but you never know. Any preparation for inflation and hyperinflation would also help in the event of a total economic collapse and a total breakdown of society. So how do you prepare for and make sure you're ready for inflation and hyperinflation? Especially if you're just an average person, someone who will feel it and not a billionaire who's going to coast through it. Trust me, the billionaires don't care. They're thinking, if inflation is bad enough, hey, I might get to be a trillionaire. But before we dive into what the average Joe should be doing to get ready for inflation that's coming, let's take a moment to consider what we're actually talking about here. What is inflation? Basically, inflation is when prices go up for whatever reason. If a bike cost $100 last year and it's $102 this year, that's inflation. Specifically, that is actually 2% inflation, which is what the US government shoots for on an annual basis. So what is hyperinflation? According to Wikipedia, hyperinflation is when the inflation rate is 1,000% or more per year. That would mean that your $100 bike would cost $1,000 a year from now. That's ridiculous, right? Easy solution, don't buy the bike. But inflation means that would be happening to all the prices of everything. So instead of spending $25 to fill your tank with gas, it might cost you $250 or more. So maybe buying the bike today, so it's cheaper than it'll be a year from now and so you can save money on gas is actually a good strategy. But what causes inflation and hyperinflation? There are many factors. I won't get into all of them in this video, but what we're looking at in the near future and what you need to prepare for is the possible inflation and possibly hyperinflation that will be caused because we've printed too much freaking money. Trillions. I'm not going to go into why or how this works. There are a gazillion YouTube videos on the topic. It's supply and demand, it's economic policy, it's 1,000 things. But here's the deal on what you need to know in one sentence. The more money the government prints, the less it is worth. The more inflation goes up. That's it in a nutshell. I know times are tough. Printing money and passing out checks feels great in the moment, but it's kind of like going on a 6-month drinking binge when your significant other walks out on you. It feels good, it helps you forget your current situation, but after 6 months, the problem is still there. And if you're lucky, and I mean very lucky, you didn't do anything stupid to make the problem worse. Realistically though, you probably did make things worse, and your binge had unintended consequences. That's where we're at right now economically. All this printing money is going to have some consequences. We just don't know exactly how it's going to play out yet. I'm from Florida, and when a hurricane is coming, we know it's on the way. But we don't know exactly how it will affect us, how it'll affect our house, our community, or our neighborhood. We do know it'll have an impact, and we do know that if we prepare properly, we can expect less damage. So with that thought in mind, let's go over how you can prepare for the upcoming hurricane called inflation, and possibly, maybe, hyperinflation, and maybe, but hopefully not, a total economic collapse. Sound good? I'll be making a few assumptions moving forward. The main one is this. I'm going to assume that you're not rich or wealthy. If you're rich, you should consult your rich person financial advisor, and I'm sure your strategies will look differently and look different than the average person. You know one thing for sure though, your advisor is going to make some serious commissions from you on the next few years. Another option if you're rich is that you could just invest heavily in real estate, gold, and silver. Historically speaking, those seem to always go up. That way after inflation has done its damage, you can sell all those assets and be back on top of your pile of money. It'll just be a significantly larger pile. I think that's why they say the rich get richer, right? That's the safe way. If you like a little bit more risk and you're rich, you could throw all your money into cryptocurrency and just see what happens. Now, for those of you who are not rich and fall into the average category like myself, but you're looking to build wealth or at least retain your wealth, here are some things you can do to prepare for the inflation that is coming soon. Again, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just some guy who made a video on YouTube. Take it or leave it. Don't blame me if you make a bad decision. I strongly urge you to consult with somebody who has a certificate or a license or more letters behind their name before you take any action. Think of me as your buddy at the bar. You don't want to risk everything on the advice from your buddy at the bar. So I have some interesting thoughts, but don't bet the farm on anything I have to say. All right, tip number 1, empty your coffers. Don't save too much cash. As inflation goes up, the value of dollar goes down. $100 today may have the purchasing power of $10 in the future. So cash is not king in this scenario. That's why your grandpa says, when I was a boy, a gallon of gas was a nickel and I could take your grandmother out on the town for a quarter. That's great, Grandpa. So empty your coffers of cash. What do you buy, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. That leads us to tip number 2. Stock up on non-perishables to use and trade. In the event of inflation or hyperinflation, canned soup or vegetables or a package of pasta may cost 5 to 10 times what it does now. The same can be said of everything. A $10 package of toilet paper may cost $50 or more. It could be much more. What happens if it's $500? Or $5,000 for a package of toilet paper? Now you're probably thinking, that's ridiculous. And to that I would say, yes, it is ridiculous. That's kind of what makes hyperinflation suck. If hyperinflation happens, prices could get outrageous or ridiculous very quickly. But if you stock up on supplies now, you'll lock in the current price and potentially have a great commodity for trade in the future. Some of the best things to have for trade and barter during hyperinflation include batteries, food, alcohol, condoms, cigarettes, medicine, propane gas, coffee, duct tape, baby supplies, lighters, and the list goes on. Just think of things that we take for granted, but things that are necessary or would be in high demand. If it falls into one of those categories, it could be a great item to stock up on as long as it's non-perishable. Now, if the thought of a garage full of toilet paper and non-perishables bothers you and you have the money, it might be time to form a new habit and install a bidet. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Tip number 3, consider investing in precious metals such as gold and silver. If you do have a little extra cash and would like something that holds value but isn't so specific as toilet paper, and it takes up less space, then consider buying some physical gold or silver. Personally, I like silver because the value is lower and it would be easier to trade for smaller items. Right now, an ounce of gold is over $1,700 an ounce, whereas silver is a little over $25 an ounce. It would be much easier to trade silver in an economic collapse situation than it would be to trade gold. Plus, it won't put a target on your back for thieves. Tip number 4, if you're thinking about a new car or home, buying before inflation happens is a great strategy. Normally, I would say if you have your car paid off, drive it as long as you can. But if you know you'll be getting a new car in the next few years, or you think you'll need lots of repairs, and you believe inflation is coming, it may be a great time to buy something reliable. That $20,000 car may cost $100,000 or more after inflation starts. Buy it now, lock in the price, and also get some of your cash reserves gone. But be sure you get a fixed interest rate if you finance, which leads us to tip number 5. Convert adjustable rate debt to fixed rate debt. I never recommend adjustable rates for any kind of debt. But if you do have some, now's the time to refinance and get fixed rates. I don't have time to go into it, but get everything on a fixed interest rate that doesn't change. No adjustable rates, no balloon payments, or anything creative like that. That way you can budget better because your payment will not change. Those adjustable rates got a lot of people in financial trouble during the 2008-2009 crisis. So switch all of your debt to fixed rate debt if you haven't already done so. Tip number 6. Start increasing your self-sufficiency. Growing your own food, having a garden, solar panels, farming, etc. Being self-sufficient, that is, growing your own food and or raising your own animals, is not something you can learn overnight. Sure, you can read a bunch of stuff in books, you can watch some YouTube videos, but at the end of the day, it's a learning process. You have to learn about the vegetables you're growing, the soil, the weather, animals, all that stuff, plus it takes time for a garden to flourish. Now's the time to start working towards self-sufficiency and growing your own food. Raising animals, if you have space to do so, is also a great idea. Don't just think about filet mignon and other cuts of steak either. That's not just what I'm talking about with animals. The right animals can give you milk and eggs as well as meat. If you have the space, goats for milk and chicken for eggs can be just like passive income in the event of an economic collapse or barter economy. It'll give you something that you can trade every single day to get things that you need. It's like getting paid every day with something valuable that you can trade for goods and services. It's passive income in the form of eggs. It's passive income in the form of milk. So start growing some crops, learning how to farm, and raising some animals. Tip number 7, don't retire early. Normally, I would say it's not worth it to wait longer for retirement than you have to because you really don't get that much more money per month by putting it off a few years. But if inflation is coming, like I think it is, every dollar is going to count. Consider waiting until you're 70 or the highest age possible to take retirement and Social Security so you can lock in the highest fixed income as possible. Now, that being said, if hyperinflation happens, it's not going to matter anyway because none of your money is going to be worth much. But depending on the inflation rate, a little more cash each month could make a big difference if inflation tops out and doesn't get too ridiculous. Tip number 8, invest in some vacant land. Right now is an incredible time to buy some vacant land. Buying land before inflation and before the Great Reset is the secret. For one thing, you'll have some land. You could always build on it, farm on it, raise animals on it, or you could always sell it. As a real estate asset, it will hold its value just like gold or silver would. It's a great place to park money until the dust settles. Also, if you followed me for any length of time, you know that I'm a huge fan of land investing. If you buy land right, you've already got equity and potential profit in it. That means if inflation pushes the prices up, it'll just make your investment worth even more and multiply your profits even further. The key is to make sure you're buying it at the right price to begin with. For more on how to buy land for cheap, check out this video, and I'll also put a link in the description. Okay, tip number 9, dig your well before you're thirsty by creating additional income. Unfortunately, people don't look far enough down the road. That's why I taught all my kids to play chess. Learning to think a few moves ahead is one of the main keys to success. When inflation happens and your salary doesn't change or doesn't change for a while, that will be the time you are quote-unquote thirsty. So you want to dig your well before you're thirsty. The problem is it may be too late to start digging the well and creating additional income at that time. If you can figure it all out, it's certainly still going to be more difficult than if you started now. That's why that's a phrase, dig your well before you're thirsty. And I'm pretty sure somebody wrote a book with the same title. Anyway, knowing that you're going to need more money, now is the time to start working on creating additional revenue streams. It's time to build it up and get some good money coming in. So if you want to start doing that, I'll put some of my favorite ways of making extra money in the description below. Tip number 10, fortify your defenses in case things get super bad. If hyperinflation occurs with the US dollar, we're going to have some serious issues going on and things could get really bad. And here's why. The reason is the US dollar is the fallback for many countries that are struggling. The most recent example is Venezuela, who has been struggling with hyperinflation in the last few years. To combat their hyperinflation, people started to use the US dollar because it's more stable than their dollar. The US dollar started to grow in dominance in Venezuela. But if the US dollar experiences major inflation or hyperinflation, it could have an impact not just on us, but on other countries as well, all around the world. Venezuela isn't the only country who uses the US dollar to bring a level of stability. Considering the fact that it's not backed by gold any longer, it really just holds its value because people continue to believe in its strength. I'm no economist, as I've said before, and I'm not a sociologist, but the fact that the dollar is based on a belief that a crowd of people just happens to have makes me quite uncomfortable and a little worrisome. All right, tip number 11, get and maintain a current passport. I hate to say it would get bad enough that we all need to turn tail and run, but you might need to take your family and run. I love our country, but if it gets unstable, I'm not going to leave my family in a dangerous situation. Make sure your family has passports that are current and that will help facilitate getting out. That's inflation, hyperinflation, and an economic collapse in a nutshell. Check out one of our other awesome videos so the YouTube algorithm serves our content to more people. And hit that thumbs up button until it turns gold.